So glad that you're here. And so glad that we're here to talk about Decode and Conquer, your 2025 PM interviews. I'm, of course, joined by the author of Decode and Conquer, Lewis Lin. So, Lewis, I know that you recently came out with your fifth edition of Decode and Conquer. Tell us why you decided to rewrite. Well, is it a complete rewrite, or tell us more about this newest edition?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a complete rewrite. I wasn't planning to. I told myself, I was like, let's just make a few tweaks here and there. But um, Nancy, you and I, we were talking about this back when we were prepping, and you're like, I'm like, Lewis, wait, what triggered this? Was it because people were saying it was outdated? And I'm like, yeah. So that's what happened. In 2024, I had heard murmurings that the older edition of Decode and Conquer was getting a little outdated, and
I
it
had
was
the version before that cover.
the maybe the red one or the black
I had
one,
the black one.
the black one. Okay, that one's super old. That one's
Yeah.
from 2013. So this yellow one was from 2022.
Mm.
And so think to myself, like, there's no way I just updated the fourth edition, the yellow cover one, 2 years back, that it's outdated. And I dug into it a little bit, talked to a couple of people, and I'm like, maybe it is a little bit outdated. And so, uh, made a commitment to write a brand new edition, did a lot of research, talked to a lot of, Meta and former, Meta PMs. Obviously, because Meta hires more PMs, interviews more PMs than anywhere else. And I'm like, maybe it is a little bit outdated. And so started to update the fourth edition, and then eventually just came to a point where I just thought to myself, you know what? I need a complete rewrite. And for somebody who's recently uh, addressed technical debt and code bases, had to rewrite code bases with my teams from scratch. I'm like, no, I don't want to rewrite it from scratch. But I did. And I'm glad I did, because interviews have definitely changed. And a lot of that change has really been driven by Meta, one part. Another part is the AI revolution.
Mm.
And then the last piece that we really saw right around 2023, for sure, was just the elevation of hiring standards dramatically, exponentially, by hiring managers. And you guys can imagine why there's higher standards, just because the economy is weaker. And so managers can be pickier now when it comes to choosing candidates.
Well, I'm so glad that you're kind of like the OG in this field. I read your book when I
You
was
make me sound like
preparing.
a grandpa.
I read your book cover to cover
Thank
when I
you.
was preparing. You said that this new edition is more than 500 pages. So
Mhm.
how many pages were in the old edition?
Gosh, well, I've got it right here. The old one, 216. So more than double the amount. Yes.
Okay, so if someone already has an old edition like me,
Mhm.
what would you tell them about why they need the newest edition?
I would say the biggest reason why it's so much larger, the biggest reason why to get it is um, the newest part of it is I've included 6 new playbooks into the brand new fifth edition. It looks like this. It's a white book with this mountain that's peeking in behind my virtual background. And what's so special about these playbooks? There's playbooks about innovation. There's playbooks around metrics, North Star metrics, hidden signals, binary trade-offs. Also playbooks about technology concepts and also AI concepts. And I think in total, the playbooks themselves are like 250 to 300 pages. And when I was writing it, I wasn't a masochist. I wasn't like, yeah, let's write a bigger book just to torture people. Um, I know that we're in a different age now where
Yeah.
attention spans are short, but it was really important to me, and this was in the context of just succeeding in the interview, that every single candidate who reads the Code and Conquer builds foundational knowledge going into the interview. And Nancy, you and I had talked about it earlier, where the old tactics from like 2018 don't really work anymore. You can't just go into an interview and say, hey, I've got a structured approach for a product sense question. It's called circles, starting with the first C, blank. Next I, blank.
Right.
RCLES. You actually have to demonstrate expertise these days in 2025. And there's no matter how much time you have to think, no matter how much you leverage first principles, you're just not going to be able to come up with foundational knowledge on the spot. And so that
Definitely
was,
not within 30 minutes, that's for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And so that's kind of the change piece of it all is just like, hey, I know people want to get ready for interviews in like 72 hours, but we're just not in that world anymore. Like we really need to augment our knowledge,
Yeah.
whether it's functional understanding or domain/vertical understanding before we jump into an interview. And so that's why it's so big.
Well, I'm so glad that you added that perspective because I forgot how many pages there were in the old edition. So when I said, "Oh, 500 pages." Is that a lot more? I don't know. So that I'm glad that you clarified it. And this actually takes me to the first of my many questions for this lightning session with you. Starting with the first question. Do you think the job search right now in 2025 is brutal or
Oh, super brutal. um, I you guys can tell I'm basing it off of emotion, and even if I was unemotional about it, um, it's just a tough time. It really is between the down economy, um, dealing with the overhang from overhiring back in during the pandemic, and then this AI revolution. Uh, it's pretty rough, definitely on the employee side. I can't. I'm trying to remember because I was there, like during the beginning of the internet, the beginning of um, mobile device adoption. Do we see CEOs as ruthless as they are in 2025, basically pointing the gun at humans and saying, "Hey, you're going to get replaced by the new technology called AI." It's brutal, absolutely brutal.
I actually have a slightly different take because I feel whether it's brutal or not brutal, it has to do with how you perceive the situation and how you feel about it. And yes, we could go by the collective data that says the market is brutal, but it also doesn't mean that just because the collective data says X, it doesn't mean that your experience will be the same as X. It's similar to saying that, oh, if you're older mom, then your pregnancy is going to be harder, right? That's what the data says. But also, not every older mom will face a tough pregnancy. On the flip side, just because you're a younger mom, it also doesn't mean that your pregnancy would be super easy, right? So, my perspective is that yes, there is a collective data and there is benchmark, and it's going to say X. But it doesn't mean that your experience will be exactly the same as X. And so, what this means is you don't have to overly index on what X is. And you don't also have to truly believe that your experience will be exactly the same as X. And if X doesn't mean, and if X doesn't predict that that is going to be your experience, you don't have to make it your core belief. And
Mhm.
so what the collective data says is one thing, but how you perceive the situation and how your mindset is going into the situation doesn't have to be the same as what the collective data says. That's my perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I spoken like a true like ex meta PM. I mean, there's something that the averages could tell you, and then then there are the micro segments, and they tell a completely different story altogether. So I love that.
Yes,
Mark
that's
Zuckerberg
exactly
will
it.
be happy.
Yes, that's exactly that. There's macro and there's micro. And I do have two very micro examples to share today that tells you yes, the collective data says the market is brutal, but that doesn't mean everyone has the same experience. So, for example, I just posted this yesterday on my LinkedIn. I helped a PM negotiate two offers earlier this month in July from 850K total comp to 1.2 million total comp in this market, right? So dreams do come true. And of course, not everyone has the same experience. So the data says X, it doesn't mean that your experience will be the same as X in whatever economy, in whatever market that it is, right? I also have another data point. This is another client that landed an offer 6 weeks after they got laid off, and they were also able to negotiate their total comp afterwards. And so, yes, there's macro and there's also micro. How you go into the situation largely depends on your belief system and your mindset. That would be my perspective to this question. All right.
Cool.
I have a second question for you. The frameworks you mentioned in this fifth edition, are they tweaks or are they brand new?
Some of them are brand new, made it more comprehensive. So I'm thinking we split it into two parts just because I wanted to cover every single question type under the sun. So there's a set of question types and frameworks that I call the core. And then there's stuff that's called beyond the core. And so it includes questions like acquisition, for example, go to market, launch strategy. I forget if it was towards the end of core or beyond the core. So some of those frameworks I did not have previously, but then I definitely tweaked a ton of frameworks, including the my favorite, my child, my baby, the circles method, and had to update that for 2025. And once again, I'm looking at you, Nancy. Big reason is Meta. And I just feel like doing the research about Meta's interview process, especially with the interviewers, I don't know if it's because of shadowing, reverse shadowing, training, rubrics, but I feel like the Meta interviewers had a very clear sense of what kind of topics and subtopics they were looking for candidates to cover and updated circles to incorporate that.
I see. Is it still called circles or you have a new name for it?
It is still called circles.
Okay.
I think maybe one place where I changed it, if you guys remember, the I in circles is like indicate the, does it indicate the customer? It might be indicate the customer. I think it was like, it's now called indicate the stakeholders. So
Oh,
for
okay.
all of you Meta fans, you guys know that um, identifying the key stakeholders in terms of like multi-sided ecosystems, absolutely important for your Meta interviews.
What if someone is not preparing for meta interviews?
Yeah, I, I definitely make the distinction in the book. So, the thing about Meta is, the gravitational pull is just too strong. Even if you're not interviewing at Meta, non-Meta companies, there's going to be ex Meta PMs there, whether
Yes.
it's at DoorDash, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb,
Mm.
and they're just going to like inherit that kind of like thinking and process
They take it
to
with
their new
them wherever they
places.
go.
Yeah, absolutely. And so even if it's not Meta and you show up to an Airbnb interview, I'd say, well, yeah, they'll probably have like Meta-like interview processes. And so I'd still or adapt this kind of meta tech tactics for those places. But
Mhm.
then if you look at more traditional companies, and tech and PM is everywhere these days. It's not just in the tech industry. You could be interviewing at McDonald's and you could be going for a product management role for their mobile app. You know, they, because they're based in Chicago or the outskirts of Chicago, they may not have that meta type influence. And I have strategies on how to deal with companies like McDonald's or like an American Express if you have those interviews as well.
We have a question from the audience, RJ. What's a top company that would have very different, almost opposite interview style than Meta? Trying to understand the range.
I'm going to have some recency bias. So the first one that comes to mind is I was talking to a former Google PM who was getting ready for a Meta interview, and he was like, "Yeah, Lewis, here's an example where this response would be like an A plus strong hire response at Google, but at Meta, uh, that's like what?" You would think those two big tech companies are fairly identical, and they're not. Yeah, Meta has really kind of flown outside of Google's influence and has come up with a pretty unique interview process. The one thing that came to mind is when it comes to product questions for both Google and Meta, one distinction that he mentioned that I called out in the book is that Google has a massive emphasis on moonshot ideas,
Mm.
but Meta doesn't seem to care as much about these crazy 10x moonshot ideas. They prefer that the candidates spend more time um, like identifying the problem, understanding the problem, talking about the different segments. And so definitely a critical distinction between the two companies.
I actually have a spicy take. Uh,
Mm.
when you really understand the crux of the problem, it actually helps you come up with moonshot ideas.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I
We can,
absolutely
so
agree.
I have a little exercise prepared for the end of this talk. So maybe we can talk through that later. I have a next question. Big tech interviews, are they hardest or are they easiest in terms of all kinds of interviews?
Yeah. I, it, Nancy, you're the first one to mention like, hey, got to be careful with generalizations. And so I think it absolutely depends on the micro segments. And so one micro segment that comes to mind is Meta. And I would argue that, Meta as a member of the big tech crowd, um, I would actually argue that it could be considered easier than other interviews. Um, the other company that comes to mind is Amazon.
Mm.
And the reason that those two would fall in my bucket of easiest is, yeah, as a product sense question at Meta intimidating, absolutely. Like Nancy's got a product sense question for us in a couple of minutes, and I'm like, oh no, what would I do? How would I answer it? I have no idea. Um, so I'm not saying that those questions are easy, but I think the great thing about like places like Meta and Amazon is that the um, the guardrails, the guidelines, the rules of what should be at and not at the interview is so clear. Like
Mm.
the interviewers, the recruiters at Meta says, "Hey, go to this part of the website, and you'll find that we're going to ask you three types of questions. It's going to be product sense, analytical thinking. We still call it execution, but that's what it's called these days. And then leadership and drive. And the guardrails are so clear on the Amazon side, also fairly clear. It's like, hey, we're most likely going to ask you about the leadership principles, and the recruiter will say, ignore the 7 extra ones that Jassy enforced. We can just go with the 14 original Bezos ones. And it's it's nice to have a company where there's so much consistency. I think Black would call it a structured interview. And that's my concern with some of the other companies, and why I would call the other companies hard is because they're so unstructured. And so you guys have probably seen a recent example. I think it was like roughly about 10 days ago, where somebody reported that as part of their Google interview, they got a vibe code
Yeah, Connie from
assignment.
the audience asked that question.
And I'm just like, I ran a poll about it. I'm like, come on, guys, do you guys think it's real or not real? Um, and there was mixed opinions, and and I can understand why there's other companies that are weaker relative to Meta and Amazon in terms of their guardrails, that they allow their interviewers to just run off and invent new interview questions on their own. And so I don't know if that's what happened at Google, but it doesn't surprise me because interviewers' power dynamic is asymmetrical, and in their head they could come up with all sorts of crazy reasons to justify new types of questions that they improvise and invent on the fly, and they could justify and say, hey, um, this vibe coding assignment is legitimate because when I interviewed at Google back in 2012, I got a vibe coding, assignment. So there, jokes, guys, because vibe coding wasn't invented in 2012, but that's how things go. Like it's this weird tribalism gang type mentality. It's like back in 2012, when I was part of a gang, they punched me in the gut like 100 times. And so I can do that to you too. And it's like, that just sounds insane and not fair. And how is that
Yeah,
relevant to what we're trying to do? But
I totally
power
agree with
dynamics.
you. I also agree that I believe the structured interviews are easiest in terms of um, getting your expectations to align as closely as possible with the company and with the interviewer's expectations. And that in itself does a lot of benefits to your nervous system. And there's something that one of my clients said. So they are a health tech PM, definitely not going after the big tech companies, but they're in the same program as my other clients going after Meta, Amazon, and Google. And then they made a comment and they said, gosh, I wish I was preparing for Meta. I wish I was preparing for Amazon because I would know what to expect. But for my journey ahead, I have no idea how to prep. I don't know what is going to be asked of me. And so from that perspective, I do agree that the big tech interviews are easier.
And I think there's just to add on to that point, I think it's also a sign of 2025 as well, which is pre-LLMs, the interviewers might have asked questions from some sort of interview handbook internally. Now they just don't have the time, and ChatGPT is right there for them to even look at the interview handbook. They'll just say, "Hey, I'm interviewing Luis. He's going for this job description. ChatGPT, what interview question do you think I should ask him?" And then there's an interview question that you choose because you've never heard that question before. And you're like, oh, wow, this would be a great way to spend time with Luis with this really odd looking question. And Luis is like, WTF, this has never been on a list of 250 interview
Right.
questions I've prepped for. And it's like, yeah, because I've got super AI powers and I've asked you surprise questions. And it's
That's right. Um,
unfair, so
it
unfair.
is it is totally unfair. We hope that more companies will see how they could be more structured going forward and to minimize some of the surprises because that's not fair for the candidates. So my next question for you is which one do you prefer, sounding like a PM or thinking like a PM?
Oh gosh. This is a tough one. Uh, Definitely not sounding, thinking possibly, but I'm gonna color outside of the box and I'm gonna choose executing like a PM. I'm just so results outcome focused that like it's not enough for me to just sound cool. It's not enough to just have intellectual exercises. But I actually just want things done. And clearly you guys can tell that I've kind of like set aside my interview hat. I'm just like in general, when we're not interviewing, when we actually have to like fulfill some OKR or some goal, gosh, results speak loudest. So that's my choice.
I love that. And speaking like a true executive, when you give them A or B, they're going to say, but what about C? That's exactly what's happening now. Love it. So between A and B, I prefer to think like a PM because if I think like a PM, I'm automatically going to sound like one. And so I would get one for free. Buy one, get one free, basically. Okay. I do want to make sure I ask all the questions by the 30-minute mark. And for folks, if you're able to join, I do have a product sense question afterwards. So I do hope that you'll join us for the second half of this conversation. So the next question, future of PM. Do you think that PMs will be obsolete or we will need more PMs?
All right. Got the hint. We'll have to go faster. I'm going to go with we'll need more PMs. And I think Andrew Ng, um, one of the fathers of AI, great Stanford professor with an amazing AI course. He put it best most recently. He just said, like, because AI has made the cost of the how of building software, you know, exponentially lower, there's more onus on the what. And I've seen it firsthand. A lot of my friends, God bless them, they're doing all sorts of amazing things with like Cursor, Claude Code. They show me um, the software they built, and my jaw just dropped. I'm just like, wow, you're doing this like 2 hours every Sunday for the last 6 months. This is amazing. Like pre LLMs, I don't know how long it would have taken. But then when we start digging around, I'm like, ugh, user interface is kind of weird, not super intuitive. And then, great application for you to use by yourself, but like, how are you going to get like 1,000 people to use it, 10,000 people to use it? And so you start to see some of the flaws that um, not enough thought has gone into the requirements and all the typical things that PMs do. And so I absolutely think there's going to be more emphasis figuring out what we're trying to build, because just vibe coding something in the background and expecting that magically to solve a problem is just not going to work.
I agree. And I also think that for as long as we are building products, the function of product management will continue to exist for as long as we're building products because products will need to be managed. But the role of product manager will continue to evolve, just like how it's evolved in the last 15 years. It's the same thing. And so it will evolve just like anything else. And whether or not we need more PMs or less PMs, I think that is less of a irrelevant question. What is more relevant is how can we continue to evolve together as a collective.
Absolutely.
All right, one last question before we dive into this product sense exercise.